Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are, and welcome to NerdTube. We're talking Bret Hart, the biography, which was on the other day. I'm here with a couple of usual cohorts who know their wrestling. Hello, Shred. How you doing?
Glad to be here, Sam. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. Sorry, I've got an echo because I've got the YouTube feed, so I do apologize. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. This is actually probably the best WWE biography that A&E have produced so far, but we'll get into
Fair
that a
enough.
bit later.
Uncle Sam, how you doing?
Uncle Sam is doing fantastic today. We're unfortunately we're talking about Bret Hart. Not the biggest American hero, but he's a pretty good wrestler.
Sergeant Slaughter another day.
Are you still
exactly? Yeah, Sergeant
Are you still
Slaughter. Jim Duggan, damn it. But what Shred said about this being he said it's the best A&E biography that's been done. I'm not gonna lie, I really enjoyed and appreciated the personal life story of the Booker T episode, but I will say that this is the most well-rounded episode as far as with anything WWE produces, you're gonna have bias, but I feel like this was the most well-rounded when including all perspectives. This wasn't a WWE centric perspective. This wasn't a Bret Hart centric perspective. This was a well-rounded perspective of his career.
Of all the shows we've seen so far by A&E, I personally like the Roddy Piper one. I thought that was very good. Got to learn a lot about him. Regarding Bret Hart, we kind of know a lot about him. I mean, Owen Hart, the screw job, some of his health problems as well. I mean, a lot of this was an amalgamation of a lot of the stuff we already knew. And we did get some revelations on stuff I didn't know about him. I mean, it wasn't necessarily revelations, but I did find out some stuff I didn't know about him, like him being a very good artist. More to do with caricature, but still, I was kind of surprised about that. I'd like to see him and maybe Jerry Lawler get together.
I'm glad you mentioned that because when I think of artists in wrestling, I definitely think of Jerry Lawler, and I don't think Bret Hart would say that he's the worthy of an artist of Jerry Lawler. Jerry Lawler, he's an artist. Like, he can do portraits and stuff. He's made Vince McMahon cry with his portraits. But Bret Hart, nothing to snuff at. Like, his cartoons were legitimate. I mean, if you told me that was a legitimate cartoonist, like those were in the newspapers, I would have believed it.
Yep. So, I guess you guys initially enjoyed this episode for what it's worth before I start doing a breakdown.
Yeah, as I said, it's probably for me, it's probably the best that they've produced so far. In that, the stories were pretty much all true. There was nothing that you could go back and say, well, this shouldn't have been included. Because they sometimes go off on tangents and include stuff that really isn't relevant to the whole biography. Dark Side of the Ring is guilty of that too. I mean, the Jake Roberts episode, for example, they didn't really need the Heroes of Wrestling segment. A&E's biography, some of that stuff they've added on has been somewhat unnecessary to the careers of the guys that they've been talking about. But in this, I think it all wrapped up very, very nicely. I was much more pleased with the guests that they had on to discuss Bret Hart. I think the only one that was disappointing is, as always, Sam Roberts, because he's much like, I would say, the three of us. He's a passionate wrestling fan, but really he's got no place belonging in a professional biography about a WWE superstar. But everyone else I was happy with. I mean, Heath McCoy, for example, he was probably one of the best options they could get because he did quite an impressive book about Stampede Wrestling and Bret Hart's early days. So again, this has probably so far been the best produced, all-round, well-made episode.
Yeah. How do I say that? I agree with you as far as the contributors. I felt like this was the best collection of contributors, and as you said about the Sam Roberts comment, and I'll attribute this to any of these people, like Peter Rosenberg, or even Pat McAfee to an extent. I mean, obviously he's more of a character, he's more of a gimmick than a fan. But these people who basically their only claim to fame is being a fan. Obviously, Sam Roberts, if you don't know, he's a very famous podcaster. He's very successful in his own right. He's not clamoring for WWE for his success. He's doing this because of his passion. But when you give people like that with no credibility other than following the business for 20, 30 years, however much, it makes it feel kind of like a plant, to be honest. Like if you were in a wrestling match, I mean, it's like a plant in the crowd. I mean, it's like you can tell like you can tell that this is sugar coated. You could tell that this is rose tinted. You could tell that this was literally looked over before he said what he said. They're like, hey, you're going to say something to this effect, right? This wasn't like, oh, we're going to ask you questions and you give us your genuine, take on it.
Yeah.
This was okay. Look, here's your bullet points. Really, they did how a promo should be in every time. They basically gave him bullet points, say this, this, and this, and make a story out of it, and that's what he did. But unfortunately, those people who are genuinely fans, when you just shell them off basically and shill them, it comes across as ingenuine and it turns me off the product.
There was two things that I wanted out of this episode which I didn't get. I mean, maybe there was a couple of others, but I wasn't thinking at the time. But the two things that stuck out the most was like a lot of his brothers in arms, not just his brother, were dying. Pillman, Bulldog, Neidhart, even people he might have like known on a professional level, like people like Benoit as well, with that Canadian connection and stuff like that. I wanted to know how he felt about all of that. I mean, Neidhart especially, I mean, that one must have been really hard when he found out he died. And obviously the one I wanted to find out the most, because it happened so recently, was when that guy ran in on him at the Hall of Fame. I want to know more about that from his perspective as well. I wanted to hear from him about that, and I'm surprised they never brought that up. But other than that, it was definitely, like you said, rose tinted. It was decent. It was good, and I think he deserved a biography like that. It put him in a good light. So we're going to start talking about it now. So we saw at the beginning of the episode with him doing his caricatures, and then we see him walking into the ring, and all the kids want his sunglasses and stuff like that. I always wanted a fucking pair of Hitman sunglasses. I loved the sunglasses. I loved the way it was just like one thing. I'm a big fan of sunglasses. I've got lots of aviators. I mean, his style is not really my style, but I would wear Hitman style because it's fucking Hitman anyway.
Yeah,
I loved all of that shit. He was part of 12 brothers and sisters. His dad was living a rural part. His dad was a proper Grizzly Adams. He was living in a part of rural Canada, living off the fucking land, probably eating fucking elk and moose and rabbits and shit. He did amateur wrestling to pass the time and to get some money. It wasn't even something he even thought of initially, but he did it to make a bit of money. His dad himself was a decent looking guy. He had like like an Olympic fucking statue sort of physique. His mum was also pretty hot as well, and being attractive young people, they got together, and probably that's why Stu fucking had 12 fucking kids, because his wife was so fucking hot. With the money they made, because people like that, they would save. He bought Stampede Wrestling. He bought a 22-bedroom mansion for his fucking entire flock. We had a stupid story of a cartoon bear. I mean, the cartoon segments, I didn't like that. I didn't appreciate that.
That was from WWE Storytime. They've covered those in WWE Storytime before, which is a series they used to do on the network.
Okay.
Which I enjoy, frankly. I enjoyed Storytime.
Stu didn't.
Go ahead.
He did.
Right, I was just going to say, Stu actually took up amateur wrestling mostly just to keep warm, because he would be able to get into the YMCA and spend his days indoors rather than out in the freezing cold as he would be doing in the tent.
Okay.
So it's something he fell into by complete accident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
he was just
he had such a hard upbringing that he literally didn't have a warm place to stay, and in a place like Canada. I mean, you guys are more north than us, so you know more cold than I do. But I can't even
He's
imagine.
Scottish.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, even more. So I can't even imagine that situation. And then, like you said, he had like this, basically this prototype physique. No. This guy was a Greco-Roman god. Like this guy had the 9x5 that literally people would goo over. It's ridiculous.
This is the kind of guy who would be in the advert for, bodybuilding equipment or supplements if you wanted to go from 90-pound weakling to,
the Gold's Gym logo. He's literally that guy. Like he's that guy.
No. Bret recalls Archie, the Stomper, who wanted to destroy the Hart family, but then he later on saw him having a chat with his parents and having a laugh and stuff, and then he started to understand the business. And he also had to try to protect the business when he was in school. The whole family were part of the wrestling business. Mom would be upstairs doing bills and arranging flights. Dad would be downstairs, putting people in submissions. Would it be his own children or kids, students, all these people? These guys would be throwing up all over the place and shitting their pants. When I heard they'd be defecating everywhere, I laughed so much. I can just imagine that. I remember certain UFC fights as well where people shat themselves. Absolutely hilarious. Now, this is the funny thing is that Bret never wanted to be a wrestler, and I know where he's coming from. I come from a line of mechanics. My brother's mechanic, my dad's mechanics, nearly all my fucking uncles on my mum and my dad's side are goddamn mechanics. I didn't want to be a fucking mechanic. Bret didn't want to be a wrestler because everyone else was in his family are wrestlers. He was a good amateur wrestler at school, but that's about as far as he wanted to take it. He wanted to be into movies, and he made a silly little home flick with a lizard and some toy cars. But that didn't get him very far. The lizard died. He dropped out of college, and he thought, fuck it, I'll get into wrestling. So all of this, Archie the Stormtrooper, his dad fucking making people shit themselves in submission moves, him not wanting to be a pro wrestler, but then thought, fuck it, I'll be a pro wrestler. I don't want to jump too far ahead after he becomes one. But what do you guys think of all of that? Uncle Sam, I'll start with you.
I mean, I obviously I don't blame him. Kind of like you did. You have that. You don't want to fall right into the family line sometimes, and that just wasn't the industry that he preferred. He said he was really into music. You could tell. He and his first wife, like 2 or 3 minutes of the documentary, they were just talking about music. So you could tell he was really into that. And as he said, he went to film school. I forget if he said he graduated or not. I don't think he did. But he went and he went in that endeavor. He enjoyed it. As you said, he did his first film. I thought it was funny the way he phrased it as far as trying out wrestling. He's like, yeah, I was telling my friends, they were surprised. They couldn't believe it, but I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to try this wrestling thing. And goddamn, did he try this wrestling thing. He really tried it.
Yep.
Well, Bret had been an amateur throughout his school days. He won some regional competitions as well, so he was pretty good at it. And that was something that Stu worked on in the dungeon, which was amateur wrestling. And he was showing people that these holds legitimately work. Because even if somebody didn't pursue training full-time in the Hart dungeon, he wanted to make sure that people didn't go away thinking that his business was fake.
And if I could add to that, like you were saying, because he was such a good amateur wrestler, and obviously that's a real sport. I mean, that's an athletic competition. Do you think he had maybe some resistance going into the professional aspect of it because it's not an athletic competition, because it's a work? Do you think Bret? Maybe? Yeah, Bret, yeah.
No, I don't think he had any resistance to it. I think it's just the case that he wanted to make his own path because he saw that his family were getting involved in the business. His brother was a referee. 2 of his brothers were wrestlers. I think it was Bruce and Keith. Ross got into promoting. Smith was a wrestler too. They don't mention much about Smith. He was pretty much the black sheep of the family, as in he was absolutely out of his mind.
I didn't know this. Yeah, I don't know too much about the Hart family.
12 brothers and sisters, you can have one fucked up one for sure.
Yeah, when you got 18 of them.
Ross was apparently a fairly decent promoter. Bruce, Keith, decent wrestlers. I think Keith left and became a firefighter. Bruce became a substitute teacher, and he also wound up running the Hart Dungeon for a while. Smith, again, he was just completely out of his mind. I mean, when they were selling the Hart Mansion, they all had to, try and get Smith to actually clear out because he, was staying there long after it had sold.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Again, Lance Storm has told stories as well about, how nuts Smith was. And the girls all married people inside the business, all married wrestlers.
Do you know when the house was sold?
Sorry?
Do you know when the house was sold?
Unfortunately, I do not know that date off the top of my head. If I did, I would have shared it. But,
gotcha.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't think there was much resistance in Bret going purely because he was an amateur. I think he wanted to form his, set out his own path in life and, make his own way. But I really appreciated that aspect of it, learning about Bret's early years and how he was initially hesitant to get into the wrestling business. And thank God, he decided to give it a try because he turned out to be one of the best of all time.
Well, Bret said he wasn't going to get into wrestling for shits and giggles. He was going to make it work. And wrestling is very much part of the Hart family, as you mentioned earlier, Shred. His brothers were involved in wrestling in some capacity, whether they were referees or wrestling themselves. His sisters all married wrestlers. Some of the more notable ones, David Boy Smith and Jim the Anvil Neidhart, married into the Hart family. And then eventually Stu decided to sell Stampede Wrestling to Vince. But he had one condition, that he wanted Jim, Bret, Dynamite, and Davey to get into the business as well. Bret also married somebody called Julie. That was his first wife. And they got married very quickly, and they got two random people to observe their wedding. So it was legit. And then that same night after he got married, he was wrestling that same night. Bret, as a father, was a very devoted dad. He spent every minute of his free time with his kids. But unfortunately, being a wrestler, he was on the road a lot, and he didn't like leaving his family heartbroken, because they would always cry when they would see him leave. So he'd actually sneak out, which is a bit fucked. Like most wrestlers, Bret was trying to find his gimmick. You know, it's very hard to initially find yourself. We saw that with Ultimate Warrior. We even saw that to a degree with Roddy Piper. You know, like just being able to play the bagpipes became, you know, a part of his overall gimmick. And with Bret Hart as well, trying to find his gimmick was pretty difficult for him. He was a good-looking young man. Tried to give him the cowboy Bret Hart gimmick. He mentioned himself that in Calgary, you have to be a real cowboy if you're going to be a cowboy. So he wanted none of that. He had a vision to team up with Neidhart, have Jimmy Hart as their manager, and be the Hart Foundation. I've heard this story before, but I've actually heard it from Bret Hart's mouth in the Hall of Fame ceremony. So none of this was surprising. Mm-hmm. He then incorporated pink into their outfits as well. Now, I think this is one of the reasons why pink is my favorite color, because these guys made pink work. You know, Bret Hart wasn't a fan of pink. I think he's still not a fan today. But he
said it's not his favorite color, but it was his lucky
color.
One.
Yeah, it was Neidhart's idea to go with the pink.
Yeah, it was Neidhart's idea to go with the pink, and it's really good. They emasculated pink. You know, it's absolutely fantastic. I love fucking pink. I wear a pink tie quite often when I'm working as well. So pink is a badass color, and more men should wear it because men can rock pink. Trust me. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that's my little rant about pink over. I do apologize.
Hot take.
Bret. This is so. I will get to you guys in a second. There's a lot to bring up here before I get to you guys. So, Bret, as even though he was in the tag team part of the Hart Foundation, nobody was getting more fan mail than Bret Hart. So Vince decided, fuck it, I'm going to make you a singles guy. And now Bret always usually relied on people like Anvil and Jim to do his promo, Jimmy Hart, that is, to do his promos. But because they were out of the picture now and he's going solo, he had to cut a lot of his promos. And probably out of all the aspects of him as a wrestler, that's probably the weakest part of his game. He did show quite good acting skill when he was on Lonesome Dove, by the way, compared to what he is in the ring. But you know, probably if the one bad part of Bret Hart, or the weakest part, not the bad, but the weakest part is his promo. But he can cut a good one now and again. Okay, you know, I'll let you in before we start talking about Mr. Perfect and all of that sort of stuff. But you know, his time with the Hart Foundation, some of my favorite parts of his career. Excellent tag team wrestler. I've loved Jim the Anvil Neidhart. They were such a good pairing. You know, like the odd couple pairing, but that works. But you know, you mentioned how they were good friends. So often you hear about tag team partners hating each other or some sort of real life feud between the two of them. But they were friends for life. It was really nice to hear all of that. It was fascinating finding out that he sold Stu Hart, that he sold fucking Stampede to Vince McMahon and had the condition of bringing those four boys in. All of
That's
these things,
I wish
him getting married. More. Yep. Can we go on? I do apologize for talking so much. Uncle Sam, I'll start with you, mate. Anything you want to mention what I brought
up? I mean, I can't really say a lot about the Hart Foundation and everything. I mean, obviously, I saw the documentary, I saw the clips, I know of them, but I just didn't watch them, so I can't really get a grasp of them. I did want to go back because I thought it was interesting about Smith Hart. I didn't realize about how ridiculous this guy was. Stu bought the house for about $25,000 when he bought it, and they sold it for about $2 million in 2003. And he refused to move out of it, hid inside of it. He used it as a rent house to make money and wasn't willing to give it up. And after the doors and windows were barricaded, he managed to go through the balcony and eventually had to be escorted out by police. And that was from Heath McCoy, who was in the documentary. So that's that's a legitimate source. I just didn't know about that. I thought that was interesting. But I thought the most intriguing part of that little segment that you went over just was his family life, because I mean, I understand you can be dedicated to your craft. I understand you can be dedicated, to being, he said he wanted to be the best professional wrestler there ever was. I didn't want to be just an average wrestler. I wanted to be the best. I understand that, but as someone who came from such a household that had, Stu Hart, obviously, like he said, he worked his ass off, blah, blah, blah. Did the whole shebang. He had 18 kids and he was there for his kids. So I don't understand how somebody could come up in a household like with that environment, have this idyllic childhood that you love and then not give that to your kids. I mean, I completely understand, there's some type of compromise, but like, that's not a compromise, a 300-day schedule. And I mean, like I said, I understand that was the time and frame, but like, I think in my mind, if he's really the family guy, he should have gone to WCW a lot earlier. His career might have not been as great, but he would have gotten paid. He would have had less dates. He would have had more time with his family. And just like coming from that environment, it was surprising to me that he didn't pick that decision, because a lot of people who don't pick that decision just like aren't caring about it. They're aloof to the situation. They don't care. But you could tell that Bret genuinely cared. He did miss the time with his kids. He enjoyed the time with his kids, but he dedicated himself so much to his work that he took himself away from it. And coming from such an idyllic childhood, I find that unfathomable that you come to that decision.
Yeah. I mean, Bret, he did enjoy some aspects of the road. I mean, he's admitted already, he admitted in the biography as well that he wasn't exactly faithful to his wife while they were together. Again, I wish they had actually discussed a bit more about the sale of Stampede Wrestling, because there was a bit of controversy around that too. I mean, Stu sold Stampede Wrestling to Vince McMahon. It was supposed to be a deal where Vince was going to pay him a certain amount every year for so many years. But at one point, the deal wound up being completely cancelled. And apparently the reason for that is because Smith Hart again was involved, and he went back in the deal and started running shows under the Stampede Wrestling brand. Stampede Wrestling itself, I mean, you could, I think you probably should have a whole episode of Dark Side of the Ring on that, because we talk about all the issues of people dying who were involved in world-class championship wrestling, the likes of the Von Erichs. We've spoken about the ECW locker room and the amount of people who've died there prematurely. Stampede's another one that you should really delve into, because Heath McCoy told a lot of great stories in that book, and they were all verified to be genuine. The insane conditions that they had there. They had the hard-hitting matches, which everybody has witnessed, from Dynamite Kid, the Hearts, Bulldog, etc. And on top of that, you had really insane weather conditions up there. Johnny Smith, for example, during a tour, the weather was so bad, the police advised him not to drive. Johnny Smith and the guys who were in the car, they had to take turns getting out and kicking the snow off the road so they could see the yellow line. Now, combine that with some really, I want to say some very mean-spirited ribbing. I mean, it wasn't like the stuff you hear from Owen Hart, where it's like maybe he was shaving cream, he would put shaving cream on somebody's car, or when Cornette was cutting a promo on TV, Owen would be spraying his crotch with a water bottle. No, there was a lot of mean-spirited ribbing going on as well, and it's no wonder that a lot of the guys in Stampede wound up developing serious drug habits. So again, I would like to see Stampede discussed more, potentially in a future episode of Dark Side of the Ring, and I would love to have seen Stampede discussed a bit more. And especially a bit more with regard to the Hart Dungeon and the reasons why Stu was, stretching people the way he was during training sessions. But again, that early part of Bret's career was interesting. He also wasn't the guy that WWE expected to be the star. They didn't expect him to be the breakout star of the Hart Foundation. They thought it was going to be Neidhart, because Neidhart was the one that was showing all the charisma. Neidhart was the one cutting the promos.
Oh, they get great promos, yeah.
Bret admitted that the reason he wore the sunglasses was purely because he didn't want people seeing he was terrified in front of the camera during those early days.
I know what you mean. I used to wear sunglasses all the fucking time.
Yeah, and the Hart Foundation was probably one of the premier teams of the 1980s. I would say if you're going to take the top tag teams that worked exclusively for the likes of the WWF, you're probably looking at the Hart Foundation. The Steiners were involved in WWF and WCW. WCW exclusively had teams like the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express. But if you want to look at a pure WWF tag team from the 1980s, you go straight to the Hart Foundation.
Love him. So Bret is now made as a singles guy, and we see him trying to cut his promos and stuff, and it's not the best, but it does get better. His ascent is not like immediate, it's a slow ascent. He has some decent matches, and then he finally has a chance of winning the IC belt, and he beats Mr. Perfect for that. And you hear this a lot, but usually, and we're talking maybe back in his period, that you win that particular belt, it means that you're a decent worker. You hear that a lot. I'm not sure how it is nowadays. Would you say it still means that you're a good worker if you win the IC belt?
Oh God, no! It's been diminished.
No?
It's been absolutely diminished.
Yeah, definitely.
What I'll say is, I mean, I understand where he was coming from. I mean, historically it had, but I mean, let's be real. I mean, Ultimate Warrior, what was the Intercontinental Championship? Not shortly, before this. So, I don't know how. I think this was another case of Bret Hart taking himself more seriously than he should be taken, well, and he has a reputation of that.
I don't know. In this case, I think he is historically correct. I mean, historically, the Intercontinental title was given to the premier workers of the company. So that's why you had Randy Savage, you had Ricky Steamboat, you had Pedro Morales, you had Don Morocco, you had Bret Hart.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
Then you did have some who didn't fit that category, like you said, Ultimate Warrior. You could also include one who was a paper champion. Only held title for I think 2 weeks, and that was the Mountie.
Yeah.
And look who he held that belt in between, Bret Hart and Roddy Piper.
And I feel, and that's why I say it, because I feel like Bret I feel at the time that he did it, the Intercontinental title really wasn't valued like he was saying it. I feel that Bret Hart made that title worth that because of what he was saying. I don't feel like him being given that was his. I don't feel that the vindication for him was being given the title. I think he made the title more than being given the title was made to him, as far as he said it.
Well, the title itself, while he had it, in my opinion, reached its pinnacle at SummerSlam in 1992 when he had to face the British Bulldog for that belt. They had an excellent feud. I remember it so well with Diana Hart-Smith in the middle between her husband and her brother. And it was a good feud. And Bret also showed that there is excellent storytelling to be made and credibility still to be kept from losing if the match is good. And it's funny in a way because I look back, after all the things you said to me about British Bulldog, and I know he's a fucking asshole, I still look back at that match with fond memories. It's almost 30 years now. I'm really showing my age because I watched that match. But I still look back at it with fond memories. It was a great story. But that was just Bret Hart moving on to bigger and better things after that match, because he then fought Ric Flair and he beat him with the sharpshooter. And this was on Saturday Night Main Event out of all places, which is unfortunate. But nevertheless, he became
Saturday Night Main Event. It was primetime wrestling.
Oh, my bad. I do apologize. I just saw Main Event, so I thought it was Saturday Night Main Event. But nevertheless, he became WWE champion. And this was quite a unique moment, as well. Like, we got this young guy who's not necessarily the biggest guy as well. He's not like a Hulk Hogan physique and stuff like that. But he is now WWE champion. And he's going to be taking, hopefully, the WWE in a different direction. Did you guys ever watch that match between him and Ric Flair? Because that was the first time I saw it. I never knew that was the match that made him WWE champion.
I'm in the same situation as you, Sam. I mean, obviously, I wasn't watching wrestling at that time, and I really haven't paid attention to the early history.
I did see it, but years later, because I was collecting wrestling videotapes, and I found one that was called WWF Smack'em Whack'em. And there was some really god-awful matches on there. I think there was things like Crush versus the Repo Man was one of them.
Crush versus the Repo Man. Lovely.
Yeah, that was one of them. There was some bad comedy segments with the Bushwhackers. There was a segment showing Yokozuna consuming like massive amounts of food. but on the tape was Bret Hart winning the WWF title from Ric Flair, and it was the full match.
Wow.
And and one thing they didn't mention from there was a spot during the match quite early on. Bret Hart dislocated one of his fingers in the match against Flair, and he actually visibly pops it back into place. You see Kurt Hennig at ringside wincing because when he sees it. But yeah,
Chief Sin Cara that.
Again, Bret not only dislocated his finger, I think he twisted his knee during that match as well, quite early on.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. Well, Bret Hart was, as I said earlier, he wasn't the tallest or the biggest, but he did have technique and he made moves look very impactful without necessarily hurting his opponent, which is one of the things I like to give him a lot of credit for. We then cut to him in during the course of the episode of him doing more cartoons. He did pictures of Hogan, Yokozuna, Lex Luger, and then Bret brings in Owen Hart. He mentions to Owen Hart he mentions about Owen Hart how he liked his drawings, and then he drew pictures of Owen Hart and said to Owen that you're going to be the bad Hart, which I kind of liked, foreshadowing their feud, because Owen himself was never given his dues, but once he had an opportunity to make his feud with Bret Hart, he was playing that annoying, bratty, jealous younger brother. Me being a younger brother, I know how that is. I'm a good archetype for that. I know what Owen Hart is doing. And it was really good to see their feud. I remember WrestleMania 10, the opening match, and people mentioning how that was one of the best matches at WrestleMania, and without a doubt, probably the best opening match at WrestleMania.
Yeah, without doubt. I don't think any match has topped that for opener.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And Owen Hart, in the shadow of his big brother Bret, beats his brother. But then Bret Hart has another match later that night against Yokozuna, wins the WWE Championship, WWF Championship. And like I said, the way they did that storyline, when you think back at it, with Owen Hart looking at him saying, "Shit, you done it again. I fucking beat you, yet you still lead the show as fucking champion. You're shadowing me again." Fantastic storytelling. The way their feud went. I remember this feud. It was so fucking good. Owen Hart was so bloody annoying. He was so fucking good as a heel.
And Owen was nearly the brother we didn't have for that feud.
Yeah.
And initially it was going to be Bruce Hart.
Oh, thank God for that. But nevertheless, Owen did eventually, to a degree, came out of his brother's shadow. He became king of the ring. He also became IC champion at one particular point. And these were really good memories treasured about Owen. As I said, luckily, we never relived his death again. And, I want to mention this again, that Owen Hart died on my birthday, which is tragic enough.
Let's not make it about you, buddy.
I know, but I'm surprised. I'm surprised. I'm surprised Bret Hart doesn't hold any resentment towards Vince McMahon over this. All the things he gets pissed off with Vince McMahon, why is he not pissed off with him over this? Because Vince made him do this. What?
Yeah, I mean, on a way more serious note, when I was watching the documentary, I actually was looking at the time and everything, because I thought they were going to. I mean, once again, what baffles me. I mean, this is kind of an aside, but what baffles me about all of these documentaries, whether it's Dark Side or A&E, all of these documentaries basically just wash over the entire history of WCW unless there's a huge event. And obviously, the event that was here was, as we'll get in later, the concussion from Goldberg. But I mean, it was just incredible that they went over that. But because of that, they did actually go over this a lot, in my opinion, more than I thought they would. I thought it was just kind of going to be brushed over. They gave this a solid amount of time. To go back to your point of how he interacts with WWE given the circumstances, I don't know if it's the pride that he has as far as his. I think that he understands that his legacy is in WWE. Without WWE, he really doesn't have a legacy. And as painful as it is to lose someone as close to him like Owen is, I feel that it's more important for him, especially this far on. I can understand, like 2, 3, 5 years when it happened, but I think this far on, I think he's just come to terms with it. Honestly, I think it's just something that, I mean, obviously it's a personal thing. Everybody's gonna grieve with it differently, but I feel that I feel that he doesn't see anything to gain out of it, out of just
Jericho,
not interacting with him. Go ahead.
you saw the Dark Side episode with Martha Hart and
Yes.
regarding
Yes.
Owen Hart and stuff like that.
Yes.
It was
And how
like,
the
this was
family
two-
basically, I mean, I won't, betray is a strong word, but ostracized her for the positions that she
and this is
was
also
taking.
2 years after the screw job, 1.5 years
Yes.
to be more precise.
Yeah, I understand.
And so and Bret Hart goes on about how much that pisses him off. Yeah, you've been mentioned it for a long time, which is why he wanted to bury the hatchet at one particular point, but it was boiling up with him too much. But after all of that he's been through, and then Vince puts his brother in a dangerous situation that gets him killed, his youngest baby brother. I'm surprised that he doesn't hold any resentment towards Vince, because I think
he
that's
has
beyond his
to.
legacy.
I mean, there's no way that he can't. I mean, as much as he can be
That's a big deal, though.
cordial
I mean,
and civil
that's a
and
bigger deal
polite.
than the screw job, in my opinion.
Oh,
Vince killing his brother.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
It
This is
depends on who
life and
does
death.
Bret really blame.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, does he blame Vince Russo, the guy who wrote Owen Hart into that position? Does he blame the crew that allegedly used to do the rigging for Sting for using an unsafe mechanism?
Mm-hmm.
Does he blame them? I mean, if he blames them over Vince McMahon, I can sort of understand why he's willing to patch things up with Vince and hold someone else accountable for Owen's death.
It's a multitude of factors, and everybody's going to equate them differently. And I mean, that's just the way that I see it.
Fair enough. Okay, let's move on. So this bit made me really smile. Like, Bret loved being like the good guy, hero, champion. He liked being the face of the company. That role model, mingling with fans. The way Jim Ross mentioned that, he felt it was an honor, it was his duty, his obligation, to be that person to go up to fans and hug them all, and and not only that, but because he was also a good-looking guy. He also had a lot of women throwing themselves at him as well, which is probably why he was unfaithful to his wife. But then other opportunities appeared for him too, not just in wrestling. He did Lonesome Dove. Now, for a guy who likes acting as much as he does, and he likes his films, I'm surprised that he only ever did Lonesome Dove. I know it's not up to him to find the film roles. Someone like him, it's difficult for him maybe to get roles, but I'm just surprised that nothing else came up in his life regarding acting other than Lonesome Dove, which is a sequel to the Tommy Lee Jones and Robert Duvall one, which is excellent, by the way. I haven't seen this version of Lonesome Dove with Bret Hart. Have you guys seen it?
No.
Trevor, you must have
I didn't
seen
even
it.
hear this before.
I have watched a couple of episodes, yes.
Oh, is it episodes? Is it a series?
Yeah, it was a TV series.
Oh, I never knew that. I thought it was a film.
No, the
Okay.
Lonesome Dove was a TV series that he was shooting.
He said
It
that
was
was
a
some of the most fun he ever had.
And
Go ahead.
And sorry, I just want to also add to that, because I'm glad you mentioned that, Jericho, because you hear stories about wrestlers getting involved in acting, getting away from the wrestling business, working in another industry. Bret Hart said the most fun he ever had. Shawn Michaels mentioned how much of a good time he had when he was making that his movie. Andre the Giant mentioned how much fun he had when he was making The Princess Bride, that nobody looked at him like a freak of nature. So it's no wonder that wrestlers, maybe apart from Austin, who said that he never really liked it that much, but he could do it, but it wasn't his favorite thing. But it's not surprising that wrestlers get into acting, because it's probably a more easier industry for them, considering the sort of workload they get up to anyways. Wrestlers, being an actor is probably a lot fucking easier for them.
I'm not surprised that Austin didn't like it.
There's a lot of negative typecasting towards wrestlers, and a lot of that probably has to do with likes of Hogan or Jesse Ventura.
Yeah.
They don't think wrestlers have the range necessary that you would you would expect for certain roles.
Well, because
Yeah.
today's, I mean, to be quite honest, today's wrestlers are being asked of different things than wrestlers back in the day. You're being
absolutely.
asked of having a fucking stunning body and being able to scream into a mic and throw a guy 10 feet in the air and have him land on his fucking face. I
And
mean,
then
that was,
do that.
yeah,
I mean, I've
yeah,
heard
And then
Bret,
do a
and then do a
promo that will put
pose and
Hamlet
step
to
on
shame.
him.
only other acting credit I know of for Bret Hart though was his cameo in The Simpsons.
I didn't know about that either. I was kind of surprised.
You didn't know? No,
You didn't know
I've
he was
known
in The
about
Simpsons?
that.
Funny
Yeah,
thing is-
I've known about that.
He bought
Yeah.
Mr. Burns' house.
Yeah, he did.
But the funny thing
He's
is,
got old
like when you
man
saw him on
style.
Lonesome Dove, he acted for what I saw of him, which is kind of usual because he's usually a bit downbeat with his promos, but he looked like he came across as a different character. So well done, Bret Hart. You're doing.
If
acting.
I recall, he was like the town, drunk, like the town, like kind of.
Damn.
He was saying they'd get him out of the bar, the whorehouse, or something. Doing whatever.
I mean, Austin's done TV. Mick Foley has done TV. I'm trying to remember what the hell the name of the series was, and Mick Foley did an episode for. Well, I can't remember if it was one episode or if it was a
30
couple
Rock
episodes.
or something like that.
It was he played a prisoner. I'm trying to remember what the hell series it was. But Steve Austin, I think, did a couple episodes in Nash Bridges as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. It sounds like is that right up his alley. Well, after Lonesome Dove, Bret Hart's contract was coming to an end, and Bret was offered a $3 million contract with 2.8 million plus royalties, so basically $3 million by WCW. He then had a famous match with Steve Austin, and is an interesting match when you come to think of it, because Bret Hart was the face, Austin was the heel, but by the time the match was over, Bret Hart became a heel and Austin became a face, and then the feud began regarding the America versus Canada sort of thing, where Bret Hart would be a face in Canada and a heel in America, and HBK vice versa. And at this time, he was
kind of
already
glossed over this a bit. I mean, the turn had been building for a while. It wasn't just like he suddenly turned in that match, because they'd had Bret
complaining
about being screwed out of the title on numerous occasions throughout late '96 and early '97 in the lead up to WrestleMania.
Sorry, just on those moments though, like to get a defeat that makes you look credible, because they've tried to do that in the past, like with Roman Reigns getting like 25 billion F5s and kicking out of them, but the 26 billion he couldn't because it was 1 billion too many. Like those are not credible defeats. It just looks like you're trying something and it's just not working. The credible defeats is really difficult to pull off, and they did pull off a really good one there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same with, like I said, Bret Hart in SummerSlam against.
I think it was good. I think it was good booking all around. I mean, obviously, like you said, for those situations, you have to have basically a perfect scenario for it. This isn't something where you can throw people in and be like, "Oh, we're going to make this face heel and this heel face, and boom." That's not going to work. And I don't know if it had been done before. Like, I mean, I'm sure it had, but I don't know if it had been done before on this kind of scale. But that's a fantastic way of booking. I mean, it's basically foolproof.
Well, some things worked with them, like his face being a crimson mass. I mean, the way it was as well. I mean, it wasn't just like a little blade cut; it was fucking lumps of blood.
I'm actually talking about what we'll talk about in the future. You're more talking about the WrestleMania match, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm talking about more as his build with
build up. Yeah, I get it.
But yeah, the heel turn itself. I mean, that's a fantastic match. The execution of it is great, and I mean that's really what what skyrocketed Austin into really starting to take off. I mean, you had Austin 316, you had all that, but I mean all this. I mean this is a big step.
Well,
but the contract negotiations they took place in '96 before the Austin match. 1996, Bret Hart's contract expired sometime just after WrestleMania 12, when he'd lost the Iron Man match to Shawn Michaels. He went and did Lonesome Dove. His contract had expired, and that's when there was the negotiations with WCW, and WWF made a counter offer, which instead of $3 million a year for 3 years, it was $10.5 million a year for 20 years. So Bret was not only going to retire in the ring for the
Sounds like a
WWF.
McMahon offer.
But he would also have a job effectively for life with WWF in some capacity backstage.
Lock him down. Made you a superstar. Lock him down. Yeah, but
Well,
that's back then. Nowadays, you'll fire
Brett
him.
wanted to finish his career with the WWF, and
Yeah,
I think
he's
Vince
comfortable
McMahon
there.
long term was right, because he said WCW wouldn't know what to do with a Bret Hart, and lo and behold, they didn't.
Yep. Well, we're getting into some familiar territory now. So his feud's beginning with HBK. And at this particular point, Michaels, we're just coming onto the cusp of the Attitude Era, and Michaels is trying to make his promos more risky, evolving promos and stuff like that. So he mentioned stuff like Sunny Days. We hear about the famous fight they had backstage where Bret pulls a chunk of Shawn Michaels' hair out of his head. How many times have I heard about that brawl they've had?
An unsafe work environment.
Vince wasn't. This is the funny thing, because Vince wasn't willing to renew Bret's contract, even though he was WWE champion. And then obviously things then lead to the screw job, which I don't need to explain to you, motherfuckers. Everybody has heard the screw job in various forms, from Shawn Michaels' biography to the screw job as well, and Dark Side of the Ring to now this biography as well.
We don't even need to go to the sources of that.
It wasn't so much a case of Vince wasn't willing to renew his contract. It was a case that the WWF was losing money. Bret had already inked this deal in 1996 to get $10.5 million. So the deal was already in place. What happened was the WWF was losing money, and they decided, okay, well, Bret, we can't afford to pay you this anymore. Let's try and get you this deal with WCW. See if that's still on the table. Maybe even get you something better. Mm-hmm. So they worked his contract. They gave him some sort of release that said he has a release to negotiate with the other side. And lo and behold, Bret gets the deal with WCW. He and Michaels had a rivalry going long before the 97 Survivor Series. I mean, these guys had come up together in the Intercontinental title scene. They actually
they came up together in the tag team scene.
Yeah,
the Rockers
and
Hart Foundation.
But as singles superstars, they came up together as opponents, singles opponents in the Intercontinental title picture. Mm-hmm. Also, Bret and Shawn actually had, I believe, the first ever ladder match in WWF history.
Really? Before Razor Ramon?
That was before Razor Ramon. I believe this was also on that same videotape I've got with the Bret Hart Ric Flair match. But Shawn and Bret had a ladder match. It was a live event. It was an untelevised live event. And this was really just to test the water and see if a ladder match would work on a big stage for the WWF. They got it over, and the idea was that Bret wanted to work with Shawn. However, the matchup wound up being Shawn versus Razor, which Bret held a lot of resentment for.
I can understand that. I think Bret Hart would have given a good account in the ladder match. Has he ever been in the ladder match?
Well, yeah. He was in that initial one,
apart from
which he won for the Intercontinental title. But other than that, oh God, I don't recall if Bret has ever. But I don't recall if Bret has ever done a ladder match for the WWF or even WCW.
Which one did you say was for the IC title again? I don't think we could hear you.
Him and Shawn. The very first one in the WWF was the IC title. It was Bret and Shawn. There was only one ladder involved. But again, this was to test the water, and it was
untelevised.
Yeah, it was untelevised, and he wanted to do this because I think the ladder match is something they had done in Stampede Wrestling.
As like a dry run to show the proof of concept. I got you.
And he was pissed that the match wound up being Shawn versus Razor instead.
Yeah, understandably. I mean, yeah.
Well, the screw job has been mentioned in various forms, as I said, not just this, also beyond the mat as well. There's so many angles we've seen the screw job, so we're going to move on from that. And this is like probably the downside of the episode, where like a long period of tragedy starts happening in Bret Hart's life. The screw job being the beginning of it, in my opinion. Then pretty much after that, like his stint in the WCW was very unfulfilling. You could see it in his face that he was not happy. It was very unfulfilling. Owen Hart dies of it, which was absolutely terrible. Seeing Jim Ross and seeing Jerry Lawler next to him, and Jim Ross having to say that Owen Hart died to everyone watching at home. It's
particularly when he only got about 10 seconds warning. You know, Owen's dead.
Yeah.
You need to announce it. You're back on air in 10.
Yeah.
I think if I can recall correctly, the way that JR tells it is I think it was Kevin Dunn speaking to him, and Kevin Dunn says, "Okay, you're going to give an update on Owen's condition," and he says, "Well, I don't know Owen's condition." He said, "JR, he's dead, and you're back on in 10, 9." I mean, that's insane. I don't know how you could do something like that. And yeah. And not to mention, I mean, obviously Jerry Lawler was very silent during that interaction. But I mean, to have Jerry Lawler's experience of, because he immediately got up out of the ring, ran to Owen Hart, and obviously saw what happened. And you can see on the broadcast immediately when they cut back to Jerry Lawler, the quickest cut that they have. I mean, he's just ghost white, ghost. I mean, he Sheamus times 10. Is what he looks like, and it's just obviously it's a very sad situation.
Yeah, but it wasn't just that situation in his life with the tragedy regarding Owen Hart. I mean, we did have the funeral as well. We saw the whole of Calgary there, but because of that tragedy, it took a toll on his parents. His mum died not long after. His dad died just a year or so later. It was a terrible moment in his life. He suffered a stroke in 2002, and then you probably starts hearing all the stories of all these wrestlers, copping it after that, like Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit. Chris Benoit must have hit him hard. I mean, not just him. Everything involved with Benoit.
All of this is within a decade. All of these things. I mean, some of them were more spaced out than others, but all of these events happened within one decade, from 97 to 07.
Now, Anvil dies in in the 2010 decade.
Yeah, well, yes.
And he already made amends there, but still, that must have also taken a massive toll on him. Like, just all his friends are fucking dying, man. Pillman died in '99 as well.
I won't say it.
97, sorry.
97,
I won't say it's as tragic as a family like the Von Erichs, but I mean, it has a history very reminiscent. Unfortunately, he's is it Kerry Von Erich is the living member, right?
Kevin Von Erich.
Kevin, I apologize. Kevin's the living member. I mean, it's very reminiscent. Obviously, Kevin wasn't the most successful Von Erich, but I mean, it's very reminiscent. Him and Bret Hart, kind of living, not only outliving their their co-workers and their peers, but outliving their siblings and outliving their relatives. It's very sad.
His wife was very close to him, even though they divorced, but still they divorced because like they were different people at this particular time. All the shit that Bret was going through and her having to deal with a lot of baggage and stuff, the relationship wasn't there anymore, and so they did divorce, and Bret was in a lonely place. And by 2010, all this baggage he was carrying, it had to come off. He had to move on, and he was time to bury the hatchet. And we famously see him, and mate, I fucking popped for this. Seeing him in 2010,
we were probably watching it together, honestly.
Yeah,
we were probably watching it at the same time, like talking to each other.
Seeing him come back into the WWE ring, with all the shit that he's gone through his life, him just doing that again in the ring. Oh, that's fucking great stuff, man. And he has his little shitty little feud with the McMahons, but it's basically all buried now. That's in the past. Thank God for that. He can move on. Doesn't have to look back anymore. With regret, that is. And we're just finishing this off before I bring you guys in. But we then, in 2008, Bret Hart met a lady called Stephanie. In 2010, they got married. And we see how she's involved in Bret's life now. Bret's in a happy place. He's a grandfather. He looks like Stu Hart. He feels like Stu Hart. He acts like fucking Stu Hart. And you see this new generation of a Hart Foundation, so to speak. And it was a nice, sweet ending, and that was the episode. So, Shred, I feel like you're dying to say something.
I think the beginning of the rebuilding of the relationship between Bret and Vince was actually Bret's stroke. I can't remember if they brought it up here in this biography or not, but Vince McMahon was one of the
Reached
first
out.
people to call Bret's hospital room. Bret was sitting there alone. Nobody knew he was there. And one of the first people to get hold of him was Vince. You know, the guy who Bret had no desire at all to speak to. And they start to patch things up from there. And then that's when you saw things like the Bret Hart DVD that eventually came out, I think in about 2004. Bret Hart gets inducted into the Hall of Fame. When was this? About 2006. And then slowly and slowly it builds to where Bret re-enters the company in 2010. He decides to guest host Raw as a he's the guest host of Raw for 1 week, and he comes out and he addresses Shawn Michaels and he addresses Vince McMahon, and they build up to the WrestleMania match. Now, say what you like about the WrestleMania match, I was not a particularly big fan of it. It felt more like Bruce Hart finally got his WrestleMania moment.
But just seeing him in the ring, and once I saw him bury the hatchet with Shawn Michaels, and even though what Vince McMahon did was totally kayfabe, it made me realize, okay, this shit from the past is pretty much over now, and they've moved on, or they wouldn't even be in this position.
Yeah, so, I'm glad to see that Bret has been able to finally move on with his life, because he has come across as very, very bitter in some of his shoot interviews and also his book. He's come across as someone who takes Montreal so seriously, like it is the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of professional wrestling. It maybe is to him, but at the same time, I mean, Montreal, you could look at so many other directions. I mean, what if somebody had said in their last day of Stampede Wrestling, "Oh, by the way, Stu, I'm not dropping your fucking belt"?
And at least my experience listening to Bret Hart, watching information about Bret Hart, just getting context about Bret Hart, it seems that it's not just Montreal. It's the entirety of his wrestling persona. I mean, I just think he takes wrestling too seriously. And I mean, coming from that background is understandable. When you got a bear living under your fucking house because your dad's a wrestling promoter, I can understand that you would take wrestling too seriously. I get it, but he does, and I don't think he's that self-aware on it.
Actually, I totally forgot to mention during his tragic events, the kick that got him concussed by Goldberg, and how he ripped on Goldberg.
Oh, he's ripped Goldberg for years since that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, actually. Because just as like a kind of a final summary, obviously Bret Hart was a fantastic wrestler. I'm not what I'm about to say is not trying to take away from anything. It's just kind of a hypothetical. We really didn't get to see Bret Hart decay kind of in the ring as far as his his prowess. Obviously, as wrestlers get older, one example that I can clearly see is The Undertaker or Sting. I mean, as these wrestlers get older, obviously they were fantastic wrestlers, but they try to get that one more match, and it kind of taints their legacy. Because Bret left the WWF at its peak, and because obviously he didn't really have a career at WCW, and it's a general consensus that Bret was talented, but you can't be talented with the situation that WCW gave him. So basically, all the blame is on WCW. Do you feel like that kind of shelters Bret's legacy a little bit? Basically, to summarize the question, do you think Bret Hart's a little bit overrated because we're only evaluating him really about his prime? We're not getting a whole lifetime career retrospective. We're only seeing this, let's say 10-year stretch.
Well, he had plenty of good matches there, not necessarily with the biggest names in the world. But he had plenty of good matches. It's just unfortunate that we never saw him in the Ruthless Aggression era, where he could have linked up with people like Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit. And I've always thought to myself, if the how different the wrestling landscape would have been if the Montreal Screwjob didn't happen. We probably wouldn't have had the Mr. McMahon character. He would still be in the background. Who knows if Steve Austin would have become the magnificent superstar that he ended up becoming.
And see, that's
maybe
also,
Benoit doesn't do what he does. Who knows?
Well, maybe that, but I think the most interesting thing is that it's possible that if the screw job doesn't happen, obviously you're not, like you said, you're not going to get all these things. All of those things that you mentioned were really the turning point for the WWE to get the attention back of the the wrestling audience and turn the ratings war. it would be interesting to me to. I mean, obviously we can't tell, but it's a interesting theory to think if if Bret leaves without a screw job because of the lack of like a big bang of him leaving. Is that going to cause such a domino effect that the WWE eventually does, fall out and pither out, and WCW becomes the national company?
It's fascinating.
Addressing your what if, your hypothetical scenario over the fact that the kick with Goldberg, and the fact that we effectively got to see Bret
I
go out
dropped
on
two
top.
at once before you could.
What I would say is, I think Bret is the kind of wrestler. Once he started to get, lose a step or two here and there, he's the kind of guy who would step away. Kurt Angle's another one. He realized, he's not going to have another year or two left. That's why he left when he did. That's why he didn't stick around for another year to get the final match with John Cena. He just left with that match with Baron Corbin. That's why Steve Austin, effectively, he left. He's another guy who had to leave on top because his final match was against The Rock at WrestleMania 19. Before he got, before he was told medically you can't wrestle anymore.
Yeah, Steve Austin for me left perfectly in my opinion. It's a shame he was injured when he did leave. But all these people clamoring for one more match, like I hear idiots saying that they want to see him back in the ring against Hulk Hogan so they can have that dream match. At this particular stage in both their careers, are you fucking mad? It's just not happening. I don't want to see Steve Austin ever wrestle again. Don't ruin your legacy, Steve.
But again, I think if Owen hadn't tragically died, and again, I think if Bret hadn't been concussed, both of them would probably have done the smart thing and walked away as soon as they realized, hey, look, I can't go the same level as I used to.
It wouldn't have even gotten to that point. At least with Owen Hart. Owen Hart was actually had a plan of he was only going to go into the industry maybe 2, 3, 4 years maximum. And then he was going to because he had saved his money. He had been very careful with his money. And I won't say unlike Bret. Obviously, Owen was on the road too, but Owen was even more of a family man than Bret was. Owen was very dedicated to his children and had a plan to get out of the business while young. He had a plan to do that.
It's much like Mick Foley, because Mick Foley, if you remember, his big plan was to make as much money as he could and retire at the age of 35.
Yeah, basically, they had a very similar mindset. Exactly.
I think personally, if Owen Hart was still alive, even if whatever he might have planned to do, I still think he would have always been intertwined in wrestling at some point.
I feel like he would have been involved. I just don't think he would have. I don't think he would have wrestled. He might have managed. He might have. He might have been like an enforcer type. He might have been a commentator. He would have been involved, but I don't even think that Owen Hart would have been the type of like, oh, I'm gonna, I'll do this I'll be a yearly wrestler. I'll do one event. I think he would have literally went the Shawn Michaels route, like, oh, I'm done, unless you're getting a stupid payday.
Owen might have opened up his own school.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That too, absolutely.
Yeah,
I didn't even think of that. Yeah, 100%. And that's actually pretty shocking that, I mean, as you said, I forget which Hart you said kind of started running the Hart Dungeon for a while.
Bruce.
But is anything modern still going on as far as like training with like a Hart wrestling school? Any of them doing any type
of Harts? The closest thing you've got now is Lance Storm's Wrestling Academy.
Yeah, and I have heard of that, and that's amazing to me. How no one in that. I mean, obviously, I guess with the deaths in the family, and obviously the just a situation. I mean, I guess nobody's taking it, but it is surprising to me that out of 18 kids who all did something revolving around wrestling. I mean, even the girls marrying into wrestlers. It's shocking to me that none of them have done or are currently doing a wrestling school. Because with that legacy,
you got a couple. You got Harry and Natalia. That's it. Harry and Natalia.
Are they doing one now?
Well, not just that, Teddy Hart as well.
They're both currently doing schools.
But no, I don't think.
Sorry. I didn't mean schools. I meant like involved in wrestling.
Oh yeah.
You've still got a couple of them still involved in wrestling, but none of them are carrying on the legacy of the Hart Dungeon.
That's what I'm saying. None of them are. Yeah, none of them are training. I mean, that was a big. I mean, you can have a whole tree of wrestlers, of prestigious wrestlers, not just wrestlers, prestigious wrestlers that have come from that lineage.
It's got to be Bret Hart, man.
But I don't
Yeah,
think he's going to do it. I don't. I mean,
it's,
as you said,
I'm not saying I'm not
as
expecting him
go ahead.
to necessarily roll around on the mat, but just to
Mhm.
be like the
A
person to
mentor
get his
kind of figure.
lieutenants. Yeah, guide his lieutenants to roll around, and maybe he could get on the ground the odd time and do the odd little thing here or there, which doesn't get his blood pressure up. But
Yeah, let me get you in this hole.
yeah, I like the way he mimicked his dad. By the way, that was hilarious.
I think I see. I just thought that was, and I'm glad. I'm glad that you mentioned it, because I just think it was so funny, because I've heard this voice. There's a famous. I'll go ahead and tell. We're at the end of the video. There's a famous story that Jim Cornette has told, and as we said about Owen being a famous ribber, and
yes.
there was basically there was a storyline where they brought up Diana Hart and how Jim Cornette was basically not bad mouthing by Diana Hart, but saying like she had relations with another man or something to that effect.
No, it was he suggested that Shawn Michaels had tried to lure her away from Bulldog.
Okay. Oh, okay. So
Oh, wow.
okay, yeah, but yeah, something to that effect.
She was
and
hot
Jim
stuff in
Cornette,
her prime.
yeah, and Jim Cornette had said
We
that.
lost Zam.
And yeah, no, Zam's here.
I'm here.
Zam's here.
I'm here, mate.
Okay, I think Shred's having difficulties. I can see you and you can see me, so I'm gonna go ahead and keep talking. Anyway, yeah, that's fine.
Better.
He's reconnecting. I think he's having internet issues. So let's continue.
Yeah, go on.
So as a recap, Jim Cornette is in the locker room. He gets a phone call from apparently Stu Hart. Owen Hart is giving him this phone and saying, "Hey, Stu's on the phone. He wants to talk to you about this Diana Hart situation." And as we said, Jim Cornette had said some controversial things about Diana on television, and Jim Cornette, knowing that he's getting the phone from Owen, thinks that it's a complete rib, and he hears, "Hey, I hear you. Is this Mr. Cornette? Yeah, Stu. How you doing? You're making Diana looking like some kind of horror." It's like, oh, Stu. That he's basically and how he replies, he's like, "Oh, that's not me. That's not my idea at all. That's all Bruce Pritchard's idea. He's some kind of pervert. He's all into that kind of stuff. You need to have a talk with him. You could talk to Vince about with him. But yeah, it's all Bruce's idea." Because he thinks it's Bruce Pritchard on the phone because Owen's a prankster, and he, blah blah blah. Jim Cornette's, he's a bombastic kind of guy, so he does that. Hangs up the phone. Owen's just looking at him, and I forget who Owen's with. Owen's with another prankster.
It's Bulldog.
Yeah, okay, so Owen's with Bulldog, and they're kind of like looking at him, and he's like, Jim's kind of like bullshit, and he's thinking, okay, who was it? He's like, oh, Stu. He's like, oh no, you're fucking with me. That was Bruce Pritchard. And as he says that, Bruce Pritchard is walking across the doorway, so he knows it's not Bruce. So after this, they really had Stu Hart on the phone. They brought the cable in from another room and on the phone. And yeah, Jim Cornette just discussed told Stu Hart that Bruce Pritchard was basically whoring out his daughter on television. And so yeah, Jim Cornette had to go and have a nice talk with Bruce about how Stu Hart wasn't gonna be too happy with him.
And Owen would fucking rib Stu as well, which was tremendous.
Oh yeah, he would. Oh, there's another good story. Owen would he would be in the hotel, and he would act like he was like the front desk, or he would act like somebody, and he's like, "Sir, we have a somebody from Stu's past that had like a gripe with him, somebody who got screwed, and he was going to come and get his comeuppance." And Owen would call, he's like, "Oh, sir, we got a killer Kowalski at the front desk. He said he's gonna whoop your ass. He's got a handful for you." And Stu be getting up, and he's like, "Oh, I'm getting right down." He'd get him all riled up, and then obviously Owen would come down there and be the bearer of bad news or good news, I guess. But
Val Venus and Edge have told a great story as well about another Owen rib where they were going into a hotel, and there was one of these guys who had like all this merchandise. He was just putting it in front of the wrestlers wanting to sign it, the kind of stuff he would just like sell on places on comic book stores and pawn shops, etc. So you got autographed merchandise from wrestlers, and he's just shoving all of this right under Val Venus's face. "I'm not signing this for you." Owen Hart calls Val's room pretending he's this guy, and says, "Hey, You promised me you were
Yeah, I
going to
know
sign
your
all these
story.
pictures. So you get down here right now and sign them, or else I'm going to come up to this hotel, I'll come up, find your room, and kick your ass.
And Valco's downstairs.
I'm coming right down. Yeah, Val goes down, and there's nobody there. He sees Owen and Bulldog like at the bar at the hotel, and then I think it's like a year later, Val Venus and Edge are on what the hell's the show? Off the Record in Canada.
Yeah, well, no, on
And
TSN.
Edge gets a text message to tell Val, yeah, you know that rib, that was me. So he
He
finds
tells him
out.
on national television. That's great.
No, he tells Val just before he's about to go on national TV in
just
Canada.
before.
So
Okay.
Val is pissed when he finds out that Owen was the guy who ribbed him,
Yeah.
Genius.
and he's about to go and do a live interview.
There's many of them. There's at least one or two that are actually on YouTube. There was a oh god, I forget
the phone call with Bulldog and Owen pretending for their
yeah, it
Domino's
was
Pizza.
from a documentary called The Old Boys. And it's just a rip from it. And it's a great clip. He's I'm not gonna ruin it, but it's basically him disturbing a room, calling for a pizza, and he just keeps hindering the people.
Yeah,
but it's a great video. Give it a watch. You just gotta search Owen Hart prank video. I don't know. But yeah, if you search that, something will come up.
Okay, guys. Well, look, one of the sweetest moments in this episode for me, I forgot to bring up in the conversation, was when Davey Boy Smith asked Stu Hart if he could marry his daughter Diana.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
that's the reaction from both that sort of Stu and Helen.
Yeah, that sort of courtship doesn't happen nowadays, does it? Yeah,
no.
But that was pretty sweet. I got nothing more really to say about this. It was an interesting episode, nicely created to put Bret Hart in a good light. As you said, Jericho, I'm sure they made sure that Bret Hart looked at this before they aired it, so they wouldn't get any more fucking grievances. So that's the last thing WWE.
Oh Jesus, wants. Yeah, you know it.
But it's amazing. It is amazing how when it comes to the competition, they don't like to talk about it. You're absolutely right. There is a difference though with
I'm sorry. I just gotta go. I mean, they own the footage.
Yeah.
Like they're like I understand they're a corporation. It's not a corporation, but it's an entity that you own. It's not like we see like other car companies like not like GM and Ford, all these other brands, like they have tinier brands. It's not like they don't market them. They still continue to market them even though they're quote unquote competing cars because they're a part of their company. I don't get it. And it's tarnishing. It tarnishes wrestling history, which then inhibits your fans from getting invested in your sport. Like people genuinely want to learn about this and know about this and be entertained by it, and that gets you vested in their product. I don't understand why they don't capitalize on it. I think it's a short mindset.
Sam brought up the controversies earlier, but if you think of this, the A&E biography was effectively designed to show the brighter sides of Bret Hart's career. They didn't really want to touch on a lot of the negatives. They had to touch on some of them, and obviously Bret brought up things like the Sunny Days promo, which got him a lot of heat at home. And Montreal was obviously going to come up, as well as the kick that ended his career. But they weren't going to bring up a lot of the other stuff. The guys that he worked with dropping dead like flies at one point, and a lot of other negatives that they could have brought up. This was really to highlight and showcase the best of Bret Hart.
Mm-hmm. I understand
after
that
the screw job, all those Hart wrestlers in the ring who surrounded him dead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, all of them. Yeah. It's just
Canadian Stampede. He's the only one of that team still alive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I understand that. At least for this documentary, I do understand that being a national, television product. This isn't like some niche wrestling thing. But like I was saying, this isn't just for this documentary. This is something they do consistently. This is something that they wash over like all the time. And it's like, if you're gonna buy up all these territories, if you're gonna own the history, at least tell the story. Don't revise the history just to co-align with the progress of your company.
And while this might have covered a lot of ground that the three of us would have known about from watching all these different shoot interviews and reading.
Oh, of course, yeah. This isn't made for us.
No. This is not made for us. But again, I think this was probably the most well-rounded and well-produced one that they've done so far. Again, there's no complaints about the guests, with the exception of Sam Roberts. There's no complaints about the way they showcased Bret Hart. There was no real scandal hidden in this like they did with Ultimate Warrior. There was no embellishment of the truth like they did with Jake Roberts or with some of the things with Roddy Piper. I think this was probably the best pure documentary that you're going to get from WWE.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Do you know what they're doing next week, A&E?
Haven't a clue.
No problem. Well, we know what's happening this week because it's Dark Side of the Ring Dynamite Kid. That's going to be fascinating. And you know what? We're going to be going back to some of the shit we saw in this episode, I'm sure. You know, because he had a good relationship with Stu Hart. Obviously, David Boy Smith. Yeah, David Boy Smith, very much entwined with the Hart family. So it's going to be interesting seeing that and some of the stuff, you know, which correlates between the two, the Hart Foundation and the British Bulldogs. They had their feuds as well. The one I remember the most is WrestleMania 3. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Dark Side. I think it's going to be a little bit of a sad one too, because you see what Dynamite Kid was, and you see what a specimen of a man he is, and then you see him in a wheelchair before he dies. It's like, what the fuck? How could this possibly be? But then you see that with Lex Luger as well. It's like unbelievable. Yeah. So
this, from the information that I'm getting, this very well might be the last documentary.
No, there's one more after that one.
No, I'm talking about for A&E.
Oh, my bad.
I think this is. I think that this was.
Oh, you think the Bret one? Right.
Yes, I think that this, because we've had the last date is June 6th, and that was the air date of this episode. The order of the episodes is messed up, but this article from March has the last airing date is June 6th. So I believe that was the last episode.
Well, Rick, you know, this is interesting. I want to end it on this. Like, the Dark Side of the Ring is all about, you know, tragic stories, but this is biographies. This is not necessarily tragic. I mean, there might be some tragic shit along the course of their careers, but it's just about their careers. So who would you like to see a biography of in the future?
Ooh.
I mean, it would be controversial, but I think Hulk Hogan would be a good one just for the casual fan. Yeah, because I want to get I don't know if you could. I mean, I know the type of person Hulk Hogan is, but I would like a genuine take of all these, you know, I mean, there's a lot of shit that he's been involved in. I would like a genuine take with the context of like a professional production. I mean, obviously you've gotten bits and pieces and all that stuff. I think that would be good. I mean, there's tons of people. I would have to think about it.
I would like to see maybe a couple of the big men, Paul White, Mark Henry. I think those would be good ones.
Unfortunately, you're not really going to get those guys. Same with Sting.
Yeah.
Because of their contract with AEW.
As far as somebody
big one would probably be The Rock.
Now,
yeah, but you know, I'm not trying to go for the so super obvious ones. You know, like there are people.
Shredder's just talking about as realistically that they could do if they were like
the biggest one they could probably get is The Rock.
Oh yeah, they could do The Rock. They could do Triple H. I don't know why they didn't do. I mean, that would be. I mean, obviously that would be a very corporate one, but I feel like they could do that one. To be quite honest, a Mr. McMahon one. I mean, I think that would be at least an interesting one.
Kurt Hennig.
Yeah, Kurt Hennig.
Hennig.
Yeah.
Dustin Rhodes.
No, you can't get him.
AEW. I keep saying that. It's all bloody AEW now.
Yeah, no, it's a good thing. It's a good thing that
Jerry Lawler would be an excellent one.
I was thinking about Jerry Lawler, but I just think that he didn't. Obviously he had a great career in Memphis, and but I just think that he's done so much as a commentator that it would be hard to stretch for 2 hours. Maybe if it was a 1 hour documentary.
Maybe another one.
They can brush over the commentary. I mean, not brush over it, but they could give it like a good half an hour and maybe mention some of the things. But I'm thinking Andy Kaufman, you know.
Absolutely, that's a 15-minute. Yeah, that's
and
a 15-minute
obviously
portion,
Memphis wrestling and stuff like that.
Yeah, Memphis. That's a good 20-30.
Going down that same mindset though, Jeff and Jerry Jarrett.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's so many.
Because
Jeff,
you've not just got Jeff's career in the ring, but you've got Jerry's career as a promoter, as a wrestler, and particularly Jerry at one point was the guy that Vince McMahon trusted to run the WWF. When Vince thought he was going to jail for steroids, he put
Jerry Jarrett was going to be the president, I believe. Correct.
That's fascinating.
Here's what
Well, look,
one role that I don't think that will be covered, but that we haven't mentioned is a manager. What type of this format of documentary? I don't think we'll get it from A&E, and I don't think we'll get it from WWE. But who would, as a manager, would you like to see like a 2-hour kind of format of a biography?
Without question, Bobby Heenan.
Okay. I apologize. One that really hasn't necessarily like been covered. I mean, Bobby Heenan, he has specials and stuff on WWE.
Jimmy Hart, I love Jimmy Hart. He's so likable,
I don't think they would
do
it, but I would like one about Cornette. I would like Cornette. Jimmy Hart's a great one as well. I mean, Jimmy Hart.
I'm going to go with one probably you guys wouldn't think of though, and that's Playboy Gary Hart.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not sure who he is. But yeah, I'm thinking Mr. Fuji as well. You know,
Mr. Fuji would be good. Oh my God.
Gary Hart would be interesting. Gary Hart, I think, would probably be the most interesting because you've not just got his career in wrestling, but also his career involved in organized crime before he got involved in pro wrestling full time.
By the way, that reminds me.
Maybe that would be more of a Vice style.
I would like to see a Dark Side of the Ring on Alberto Del Rio. I think that guy's got a lot of attributes to be a decent contender for a future episode of Dark Side. Not A&E.
He would let him.
He probably will be, but I think Stampede Wrestling was definitely a topic they should look into for the future.
I thought they had. Sure. I thought they had either like announced that they were going to do an episode in a future season, or that they were going to cover it. Because I feel like that had been brought up.
Well,
especially when they were talking about the screw job. I feel like they brought that up.
The Plane Ride for Hell for me is the most interesting because I knew about it, but I just thought it was just a bit of stupidity on the plane that
that's got this week, right?
That he got,
next week. Dynamite Kids next week. Dynamite Kids this week.
Oh, Plane Ride from Hell next week. Okay.
So I never.
I'll say two stories I want covered by Dynamite on the Dynamite Kid one. One is the fight between him and Jacques Rougeau.
Yeah.
And the other one is I hope they speak to his ex-wife and they cover the story which she put in her book, which was that he used to wake her with a gun to her head and tell her one day this will be loaded.
Jesus Christ. What is it with these steroid fucking freaks doing that shit to their fucking family members? Anyway, I would like to talk more about this, but we have gone on 22 minutes longer than we should have. Been thoroughly enjoyable. So I'd like to say to all of you out there who's watching right now, don't forget to subscribe to NerdTube. We're going to be back in a couple of days talking about the Dark Side of the Ring, Dynamite Kid. That will be on Friday, similar time, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
maybe similar time.
Usually about 10
p.m. Somewhere between 5 and 7 UK. Excuse me, 10 to 12 UK.
Yeah, between 10 and 12 p.m. UK will be on. Probably 10 p.m. this Friday. We'll be talking about Dynamite Kid. So be there for us. We'll be doing a spoiler review for that. But we'll be talking about other stuff too as it comes out. Loki. Loki season 1, episode 1 comes out tomorrow, and we'll be talking about that too. Me and a different bunch of cohorts because these two guys are not into the MCU.
I'll be there. No, I'm going to be there. I'll be there.
You'll be there for the wonderful.
I'll be there. Yep.
All right. Well, like I said, we'll see you guys when we'll see you guys. Thank you very much for watching. Have a nice day. Take care. Bye bye, fellas. Bye bye, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye bye.